I'm Jordan Mciver. I am the lead for the data science practice here at Alchemy. And to my right, I have Peter Stike, who is the microservices solutions architect and co-founder of MadCore Limited. Thank you for being here, Peter. And to his left, Bill Orme, the government and critical infrastructure lead for ForcePoint. Bill will be talking about data source force multipliers in insider threat scenarios. He'll explain what that means. And Peter will be talking about graph services and role-based access control. So I wanted to start off in Greenland. And you may have seen this in the news last week. They discovered a 19-mile wide crater a mile underneath ice, under a glacier, underneath the Hiawatha Glacier in Greenland. And this is a really good example of what's possible when you actually are able to combine data sets. So what they've been doing is, over the last 20 years, lots of different researchers, scientists, others have been taking measurements of this area, and different types of measurements. Here's some pictures of them. And only recently they've been able to combine these different types of measurements. And what they found was, through modeling, they identified that there was a glacier, that there was a crater from a comet from 10,000 years ago underneath this kilometer-high glacier. And then from there, they were able to say, okay, it really looks like there's a glacier. Let's get out there and actually take some samples, and they're starting to confirm what's possible. So this is a good example of what you can get when you start to combine data sets. Now, this is a scientific example. I had one about a decade ago. I was working on a project where a company had separate data sets of operational data, financial data, and marketing research data. And what we found when we started to combine these was that, A, there's certain customer segments that were losing the money. They had a fairly low margin, high volume business, and those who used customer service heavily were actually losing the money. And then when we combined that with marketing research, we saw that they were self-selecting all the people who were answering their surveys. And lo and behold, the people that were losing the money were also the ones that were leading all of their marketing research and were responding. So they were very adamant and getting out there. And what was happening was they were actually determining their strategy based on these people who they probably didn't want to be marketing to. So that's a really good example of what you don't necessarily want to be doing and what's possible once you start connecting data sets. There's lots of other examples. I'm sure everyone has their own of better customer experience when you can understand the whole customer journey, reduced costs when you can understand what the true drivers of cost are. There's going to be a lot of fatigue internally when people have to be doing manual connection of data sets. And you're really missing transformational ideas by not necessarily understanding your business and your customers. So what's the problem? What's the difficulty? Everyone will know this phrase, data silos. That's the main problem. And there's lots of reasons why we have data silos. A big part of it now is that people are going off, separate departments are buying specific tools. Those tools have their own databases. They might be only in one department. They start to get rolled out. Well, now they need to start to get connected to all the other data sets that are there. Another big driver we see with a lot of the clients that we're working on is in the IoT space. So you have all of these pieces of equipment that are essentially isolated, not producing data, not being stored. Now it's starting to come online. And we're actually working with BP right now on problems very similar to this, where we're starting to bring in all of that equipment data, all of that sensor and monitoring data. So this is a problem that a lot of different companies are dealing with. So I wanted to go over just at a very high level. We're not going to go into the data science or the math, but to help the rest of the talks, I think it's worth us all having a primer on a general approach to how you use data science to actually break down those silos, connect records across different data sets. And this is a visual way to say that this record might be from your CRM database, this record might be from your customer service database. You don't necessarily have a unique customer ID where you can directly match them. And you want to be able to say, okay, of all the possible connections that you can make, which connection is the one that you know to be true, and you can start to do insights once you have those data sets connected. Now, in reality, it's not just one thing you're looking at, one type of similarity between these different records. You have lots of different ways you can measure similarity. So potentially their name is written slightly different. Potentially you're looking at when they joined your customer database. There's lots of different ways you can actually measure similarity, and that's really the trick here, is using all that data to come up with the right recommended connection. So the next step is, once you have all that data, is you can actually put a probability that any of these many-to-many connections are the same person. I'm just going to keep using the customer example. It's an easier one to get your head around, but this could be equipment, it could be other databases. And then from there, you're able to look at this process at a high level. There's lots of different ways you can do it. There's obviously lots of detail within this, but this is the general idea. And what we're going to be talking about today is the problems that organizations encounter when they want to do this work. So I'll just walk through a few of them, and our talks will cover most of these. We have, on the one side, when you have all of this data, all of these many-to-many relationships, it's difficult to manage that much data. You need new types of math and new types of technology to actually be able to handle that much data, and Peter will be talking a lot about that in his presentation. We also need to use training data. So the machine learning process is to use both business rules and training data to say, okay, of the possible connections, let's learn what type of similarity metrics actually drive a connection between records so that you can break down those silos. That applies to the business rules as well. Most businesses say that these are the rules that we've been following, and once you actually look at the detail, look at the individual data points, that's not the case. Data scientists are often working in a corner, so they need a lot of context, and if they do that work without that business context, they're not going to produce good results. A big part that we don't necessarily hear a lot of people talking about is being able to interpret the results well. I think everyone's probably heard that, but talking about specific ways that we can help in that area, and both Bill and I will be covering some topics there. Once you do connect these data sets, lots of new risks can present themselves. GDPR is obviously on the top of mind for most companies at the moment. There's lots of other considerations Bill will be talking about today. And then lastly, once you are able to understand these benefits, that's not really just enough to produce a report or a dashboard that leaders can understand things. How do you, as an organization, take advantage of all these new insights? And that's when we talk about the business change that's needed to realize those benefits.